Hello dear friends, welcome back to Job Lesson for you. Dear friends, we are discussing about the bones of the body, right? So in the previous lectures we have discussed about some bones which I will tell you. First of all, we have divided the human skeleton. Then we had discussed about all the bones of the human skeleton, which we had divided into axial skeleton and appendicular skeleton, and all the bones of axial skeleton and all the bones of appendicular skeleton, which we had calculated, which was about 216 bones present in the human body. Then we discussed about the anatomy of the pelvic bone, right, and the attachment of muscles to the pelvic bone. We have discussed, inshallah, and we will carry it onward, forward, and we will discuss all the bones of the body, inshallah, in a big detail. So here we have as I have written here, that the anatomy of long bone. So I'm discussing about the anatomy of the long bone in this lecture, right? So first of all, let us introduce the lecture. This is a typical long bone which I have drawn on the whiteboard, right? And now we will see all the parts of the long bone in detail. So first of all, friends, this is the long bone, the very simple anatomy if you want to learn of the long bone. So here we have a long bone, and I will show you with a very simplified diagram. This is a long bone, right? And you know that this long bone has one upper end, one lower end, and in between these two ends, this is the middle part, right? It's quite easy. So a typical long bone should have an upper end and a lower end and a middle part. That's so simple, right? So as you can see here, this is an upper end, this is the lower end, right, and this is the middle part, right? So we say that these upper ends, right, are called the epiphysis, right? So what is this? This part is called epi. Epi means above, and what does it mean by physis? I will clear. So this is epiphysis, right? And this part is also called epiphysis, right? So we say as this epiphysis is upper and this epiphysis is lower, that's why we say, look carefully, this is called upper epiphysis, or we say that this is called the proximal epiphysis. So what is that? That is the proximal epiphysis, and this one is distal epiphysis. Distal epiphysis. Why it is called proximal? Because look carefully. If you look at my humerus bone, right? This is my humerus bone here. This humerus bone upper end, right, is in contact here, has made a joint here, right? And this lower end also has made a joint here. Now listen to me carefully. When we say that the epiphysis which is connected to an immovable bone, right? The epiphysis which is connected to an immovable bone, this is called the proximal epiphysis, or it makes the upper joint. Just we simply say that this proximal epiphysis makes the upper joint and the distal epiphysis makes the lower joint of that bone, right? So here will be the upper joint of this bone and here will be the lower joint of this bone. So the distal epiphysis and the proximal epiphysis, or proximal means which is near to the joint, right? And this part of the humerus bone is distal from this shoulder joint, right? So that's why we say this is proximal epiphysis, this distal epiphysis. Next, in between the two epiphyses we have this shaft, or we have this diaphysis, right? So let me make it clear that this part of this bone which is compact, which is made up of hard bone, this is called the diaphysis. Diaphysis. Diaphysis means dia. Di means two. with the part of the long bone which is present between the two epiphyses. That's so simple. The part of the long bone which is present between the two epiphyses, this is called diaphysis, or in simple words we call it as shaft. We call it shaft of the bone, right? So the shaft of the bone is called diaphysis. Done. Then the next part of this long bone will be here. Look, my dear friends, look clearly. Look, this is the shaft, right? Or this is the diaphysis. Now the upper part, right? Or the part of the shaft which is near to epiphysis, this part of this shaft is called the metaphysis, right? Look carefully, my friends. What I'm telling you, the part of the diaphysis which is near to epiphysis on both sides. This is the definition of this part. The part of the diaphysis which is near to epiphysis, either proximally or distally, this part is called the metaphysis, right? So this will be your metaphysis of the bone, of this long bone, right? So I hope now you understand the metaphysis. What is metaphysis? Metaphysis means the part of the shaft which is near to epiphysis. This part is called the metaphysis of the long bone. Now let me name it here. This is metaphysis, right? Either proximal metaphysis and distal metaphysis. So this is also metaphysis. I hope you are understanding me. This is metaphysis. Now, in between the epiphysis, right? This is your epiphysis and this is your metaphysis. In between the epiphysis and metaphysis, there is a line, right? And this is called epiphyseal plate or epiphyseal line, right? So what is this part? This is called epiphyseal plate, right, friends? And it is also here. And what is the purpose of this epiphyseal plate? Actually, this is the part of the bone which keeps growing, which help in the growth of your bone. That's why we say that this is called, also known as growth plate, right? So what is this? This is epiphyseal plate, or this is also known as I told you, the growth plate. Why? Because when your bone grows, actually here will be your epiphyseal plate and here is your epiphyseal plate. This epiphyseal plate contains those cells which are always in the state of production of the bone. So your bone will grow in this manner. Look, from this side to that side and from that side to this side. So actually your bone mass is added into the shaft and your bone starts growing. So look here, for example, this is a bone, right? And this is the proximal epiphysis, distal epiphysis, and here are the epiphyseal plates, right? Now from these epiphyseal plates, mass of the bone is added into the diaphysis, into the shaft, and your shaft, when mass is added and your shaft grows, so the epiphyses go away from each other and the shaft of your bone increases in its length, and that's why we say the bone increases in its length and the bone grows, right? So this is called epiphyseal plate or growth plate. Clear, friends? And this plate is also known as the epiphyseal line. We also call it the epiphyseal line, right? Here, the next important thing, on the outer surface of both the epiphyses, there is a hyaline cartilage layer, and this is called the articular cartilage, right? On the outer surface of both the epiphyses, there is a thin membrane, a thin layer of hyaline cartilage, and this cartilage is called the articular cartilage. Why? Because this cartilage will help in the formation of joint, right? So that's why we say that what is this? This is your articular cartilage, right? It helps in the in moving the bone into the joint, right? For example, if I make here, for this is a bone, right, and here is an other bone, right, and these both of them are long bones. So here will be the articular cartilage, and here will be also the articular cartilage. So this cartilage actually helps in the movement of the joint. So that is the articular cartilage on the proximal epiphysis and on the distal epiphysis. And for example, this is the head of the bone, so this articular cartilage is all around this head or the proximal epiphysis and also all around the distal epiphysis, right friends? Done. The articular cartilage is also done. Now the next important thing about this proximal or distal epiphysis, just we say about the epiphysis. Now look, in this epiphysis we have soft bone, or we have, look carefully, we have red bone marrow. This is actually bone marrow which is present in the epiphysis, right friends? So this is, what is this? This is called the red bone marrow. Why it is called red? Because it has red color. And also here we have red bone marrow. If someone asks you where is the red bone marrow present, now you know that your red bone marrow is actually present in the epiphysis, right friends? So let's name it. This is the red bone marrow, right friends? And look carefully, in between this marrow, in between this red color, right, you can see this white part, or let me draw it with a black color, let me shade it with black color, right? This part which is other than this marrow part, this is called soft bone, right? So there is soft bone present in your epiphysis on both sides. So this is the soft bone, or we say that this is the spongy bone, or we say that this is calcareous bone, right? So let me also name it here. What is this? This is the soft bone, or we call it spongy bone, or we call it calcareous bone. Soft, spongy or calcareous bone, right friends? So around your red bone marrow you have a meshwork. Actually that bone is not present in the form of fibers, right? And here we don't have any canals, any rings of the bones, nothing, but they are present in the form of meshwork, right? So we say that this is very soft in nature. This part of the bone is soft in nature. That's why we say this is soft bone, spongy bone or calcareous bone, right friends? So around the red bone marrow you have what? Soft bone, and this red bone marrow is actually responsible to make your blood. It makes your blood, and you know that bloods, I will say it makes your blood cells, and you know that how many types of blood cells you have? Red blood cells and you have white blood cells. So all the blood cells of your body, I mean red blood cells and white blood cells, they are present by this red bone marrow, not by the yellow bone marrow. So red bone marrow is present in the proximal and distal epiphysis. Then there is the epiphyseal plate, then there is metaphysis, right? And then there is your diaphysis, which is also known as shaft. Now look carefully. Inside this diaphysis, there is a cavity. There is a canal present, right? You can see here, inside this this shaft or this epiphysis, diaphysis, there is a cavity present, and this cavity is known as bone marrow or marrow cavity, right? What is this? This part is called the bone marrow, right? And we also call it the marrow cavity. Marrow cavity, right friends? Inside this marrow cavity, as you can see here, I draw it with green color, but actually this is not drawn with green color. Actually this is a containing a bone marrow, which is called the yellow bone marrow, right? This cavity contains what? This cavity contains yellow bone marrow. So let me write it here. Yellow bone marrow, right? And this yellow bone marrow was, in the beginning it was the red marrow, but now it is in the long bone, in the adult long bone, it becomes yellow marrow, and it loses the ability of production of blood cells, right? Because the duty of the blood cells production is given to the red bone marrow. Now it does not produce any blood cells, rather it stores fats and vitamins and these minerals and other substances. So in this marrow cavity, what is present? Bone marrow is present. And which bone marrow? Yellow bone marrow is present there, right friends? Next thing, look carefully. Around your bone, around your all bone, there is a protective membrane covering this bone, right? Around your bone, we say the whole bone, not only the shaft. Around the whole bone there is a membrane which is present all around, and this is called the periosteum, right? What is this membrane called? This is called the periosteum or periosteal membrane, right my friends? If I'm holding this, this is a bone in my hand, right? And we have a paper here, right? This is a bone. So around this bone there is a protective connective tissue membrane which surrounds the bone, and this is called the periosteal membrane, or it is called the periosteum, right? So what is this? This is peri. Peri means around, osteum means bone, so periosteum, right? Or periosteal membrane. Then if we move inside the bone to the marrow cavity, here is another membrane which is surrounding this cavity, right? This is called the endosteum. What is this? This is endosteum. So endosteum is present in the lateral walls of the marrow cavity. Now if we let me show you here, look carefully. If this is the bone, around it there is periosteum, and if you look inside, here in these walls, right here around these walls, there will be your endosteum. So I hope you understand me, right friends? This is your endosteum, and endosteum is also a protective membrane which contains lots of osteoblast cells embedded in this membrane, right? So this is endosteum and periosteum. The next thing is that in between this, look carefully, endosteum and periosteum, right? There is the bony part of this shaft. There is the bony part of this diaphysis, right? And this is actually your hard bone, right? This is not the soft bone, this is hard bone, right? So let me name it here. This is your hard bone, right? So your hard bone is mostly present in the diaphysis of the bone, because this is the part which bears all the weight of your body and everything. So this is the hard bone. So we have hard bone, right? Hard bone is present where? Hard bone is all over present around the marrow cavity. Hard bone is all over present around the marrow cavity. So we say that there is the periosteum, there is the endosteum and the hard bone, and there is a cavity which is filled with the yellow bone marrow, and that is called the marrow cavity, or we call it the medullary cavity, not the bone. Okay, bone marrow is present there, but we say which bone marrow? There is the yellow bone marrow, and this is called the medullary cavity. Right, friends. And one thing next, the hard bone is actually present around the marrow cavity or medullary cavity. We say that this is actually the cortex. This is actually the cortex of this marrow cavity or medullary cavity, friends, right? So this was about the anatomy of this long bone, very simplified anatomy as I explained here. These are epiphysis, right? Proximal epiphysis, distal epiphysis, epiphyseal plate, right? And this is also known as growth plate. And one thing more, here we have, my dear friends, here we have a line which is called the epiphyseal line, right? This is epiphyseal line. Okay, so let me name it also here. This is epiphyseal line. Right, friends. Okay, so I hope you understand the anatomy of the long bone. Now, one thing more, friends. There are about 4 types of this epiphysis, right? The epiphysis has how many types? It has about 4 types. And what are those 4 types? Look carefully. First, we have the pressure epiphysis, right? So about epiphysis, let me write here. How many types? There are 4 types of epiphysis. So the first one is pressure epiphysis, right? And where is this pressure epiphysis actually present? This pressure epiphysis is actually, you can see this proximal and distal epiphysis. So these are actually the pressure epiphysis, and these are the types of epiphysis which makes the joint. And I will say that these are the epiphysis which actually transfer the weight of the body from the upper bone to the lower bone, right? So what is pressure epiphysis? The type of epiphysis on which pressure is applied from the above bone, right, which transfer the bone of the weight of the upper bone to the lower bone, or we say which transfer the weight of the body from one bone to other bone. So this is pressure epiphysis, and actually these are the proximal and distal epiphysis. Proximal plus distal epiphysis, right? So pressure epiphysis. Then other than pressure epiphysis, we have the traction epiphysis. The second one is traction epiphysis. And the traction epiphysis is actually the epiphysis to which certain ligaments and certain bones are connected. Just simply we say that, let me draw here a diagram, right, friends? For example, I will draw the diagram of the femur bone. This is the head of the femur, right? And this is the greater trochanter. This is the shaft begins, right? And here we have the lesser trochanter, and this is the shaft. Now look carefully. This is the head, and actually this head of this bone is actually the pressure epiphysis. Then this part, right, and this part, right? Here there are the attachments of certain ligaments, and certain muscles are attached to it. So these are called the greater trochanter and lesser trochanter of the femur bone. So we say that what is traction epiphysis? Traction epiphysis is the type of epiphysis to which certain muscles and ligaments are connected. Okay, so the examples are the greater trochanter. Chacha. Na. ولي خدا چاپیانی دقل تبار کی رضا بیوال دیا لخای ماچو آغا لخای واچو واچو greater trochanter and lesser trochanter of your femur bone. So there will be other examples also, so just we have these two examples for you guys. So this is called the traction epiphysis. As I told you that this epiphysis helps to hold, or it provides attachment to certain ligaments and muscles. Then there is a atavistic epiphysis. Atavistic epiphysis, right? Actually, these epiphyses, atavistic epiphyses, or sometimes they are individual bones, right? They are two bones actually, but they get fused with each other at certain limits of life. They get fused with other bones. I will just say these are the two bones, but the parts of these bones fuse with the part of other bone, so we say that this is called the atavistic epiphysis. So the examples of these kinds of epiphysis are the coracoid process of scapula, right friends? So what I said, here we have the pressure epiphyses, which are the actual epiphyses, and they transmit the weight of the body. Then there are traction epiphyses. They help to connect some of the ligaments and some of the muscles and tendons to it. Then there are the atavistic epiphyses, and these are the epiphyses which are the parts of individual bone, but they fuse with other bone and they make a strong union connection with other bones, so that is called the atavistic epiphyses. And these are the examples of these are the coracoid process of the scapula, right? Then there is the fourth one, which is called the aberrant epiphysis, called aberrant epiphysis. These kind of epiphyses, the book says that they may be present or they may not be present. For example, these kind of epiphyses are sometimes found in the proximal metacarpals, right, and distal ends. So we say in the proximal and distal ends of metacarpals, these kinds of aberrant epiphyses are sometimes present, not in all the human bodies. So how many types of epiphyses you have? You have four types of epiphyses, right? The pressure epiphysis, traction epiphysis, atavistic epiphysis, and then you have the aberrant epiphysis, and all the examples of each. So my dear friends, this was about the anatomy of long bones. Another thing which we should know, a very small thing friends, that from where does the long bones receive their blood supply. Look carefully. If we talk about the blood supply of the long bones, so we should know some arteries which supply your long bone. So what are those arteries, the actual arteries? First we have the nutrient artery. Look carefully my dear friends. In the shaft, either in the lower part or the upper part of this diaphysis, there is a very small foramen, right? There is a very small foramen, either as I told you, either in the lower side or the upper side, right? Or either on the right side or the left side. There is a very small foramen, and through this foramen there is a big the entry of a large artery to this bone, and this artery is called the nutrient artery. Actually this artery enters the bone and starts giving branches, so this is called the nutrient artery. So if someone say that long bones receive their blood from where, they can receive their blood from nutrient arteries, right? Then they can also receive their blood from the periosteal arteries. The second group of arteries may be periosteal arteries, right? These are numerous arteries which are present around the bone, right? Around the bone. So let me draw here a bone. This, for example, this is a long bone, right? Here is the nutrient foramen, and through this nutrient foramen there is the nutrient artery, and it entered the bone and gives branches here. This is the first artery, the big artery. Then there is an other group of arteries which are present around the bone, below the muscles and these tendons and everything. So these are called the periosteal arteries. They also gives blood and nutrients to the bone from outside, we can say. And then there are the epiphyseal arteries, the next group of arteries. These are called the epiphyseal arteries, right? And these epiphyseal arteries are actually present around the epiphysis. And we say that, for example, if there are certain ligaments and certain muscles present, right? So the branches of those arteries which come to the muscles and tendons and ligaments, they enter the epiphysis and supply blood to the epiphysis. So they are also called the epiphyseal arteries. And there are the fourth group of blood vessels which are called the metaphyseal arteries. Metaphyseal arteries. So you know that here is your metaphysis, right? Here is metaphysis and here is metaphysis, and certain small arteries enter this metaphysis and they give supply to your blood. So these are called the metaphyseal arteries. So your bones, the long bones, receive their blood from can receive. I will not say that all the long bones will contain these four group of arteries, but those typical long bones, right, or those largest long bones will have the nutrient artery, will have the periosteal arteries, will have the epiphyseal arteries, and will have the metaphyseal arteries. So my dear friends, this was about the anatomy of the long bone, anatomy of a typical long bone. If you watch the lecture 2 or 3 times, you will understand everything and you will never forget about the anatomy of the long bone. So that's quite easy, inshallah. So friends, the next video will be about certain long bones, the important markings and landmarks of those bones we will discuss, and attachments and everything. So inshallah, be with us. And if you like the lecture, please share these videos with your friends, and please hit the like button also, and do comments to me. And so see you in the next lectures. Till then, Allah Hafiz.